sure. Mic check, mic check. Oh, and I can move this. This is great. I will probably move around a lot because that's what I do. But thank you so much for that kind introduction. Thank you, Care Oklahoma, for hosting such an important day, for all that you do. I'm looking for some of the staffers, but seriously, thank you. So yes, my name is Ruwa, and I currently serve as a Georgia State representative. And this is my first term, so I'm wrapping it up. I'm up for re-election again because we get elected every 2 years. Like Oklahoma, we also have a part-time legislature, meaning we only meet for a few months out of the year and then we don't really meet again. But part-time legislator means that you're still full-time. So that's been honestly such an incredible but challenging experience for me. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna share a little bit with you, talk a little bit with you about how I got to where I am, and then I would love to open up for some questions because I don't actually like talking at people. So it's not my favorite thing. But so a little bit of background to kind of give you an understanding of literally like where I come from outside of the fact that I was born in Jordan and I moved to Georgia when I was 7. I graduated from the same high school as Marjorie Taylor Greene. I remember, growing up in Forsyth County, which for those who don't know, that's the county that Oprah Winfrey went to, and she was told like you can't be black after sunset there. There used to be a really, really vibrant black town. A lot of the black families were literally forced out of the town, and it was turned into a lake now known as Lake Lanier. Do not ride your boat there. Seriously, it's haunted. But it's such a, the reason I share this is because I think that's what people think Georgia is. But I have a sister who's 12 years younger than I am, who now has a completely different experience with the county and the city than I ever did. I'm 30, so she and I are 12 years apart. And so my experience sort of meant that at home, my mom would teach us sort of our values and Arabic. If we spoke in English, she would throw a shoe at us. But it also meant that she grounded me in an identity that I became incredibly, incredibly proud of as a Muslim and a Palestinian. And it really became an anchor for me in school where I would, understandably, or I guess expectantly, get bullied by my peers. And I remember when I was 14, after a particularly challenging day of kids pointing to my house from the bus, calling it the bomb lab, calling me a terrorist, sand, N-word, all the good stuff. I actually was sitting around the kitchen table for our after school, what I called school with mom. She was going over some verses from the Quran and she'd asked us to read and memorize. And I came across one that read, "O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another." And man, that really, really, really became an anchor for me. And it kind of inspired me as a kid, instead of, fighting with people and getting mad, to just do what I love best, which is argue. I'm not a lawyer, but to the surprise of many, but I loved arguing with my friends, and it actually paid off. A lot of them came around, a lot of them realized that what they were taught wasn't actually true. A lot of them became a lot more receptive and understanding, and over time, you could feel a difference in the community as more, kids moved into the county, as more kids identified as Muslim openly and proudly. But there was one day when I had taken driver's ed. I was really excited. I was like, I'm gonna get my freedom, I'm gonna start driving. But then my parents were like, it's not that we don't trust you, we don't trust other drivers, the usual. But I didn't know at the time I was very committed to getting my license, and I was taking driver's ed, and my teacher was like, "Hey, can you step out in the hall with me?" And so, there's like all this noise because we're on the simulators and we're playing around and messing around, and he closes the door, and I remember we're standing in this incredibly silent hallway, and I'm watching like all my friends still in the classroom, like, why am I out here? And he goes, "Is it true you're Palestinian?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm Palestinian," like always excited as I am. He then started interrogating me to make sure I'm not part of Hamas and my family doesn't have connections to Hamas. And it was literally so ridiculous. I actually laughed. Like I remember, because of how absurd it was, I laughed out loud. And he was so shocked. He was like, "Why are you laughing?" And I was like, "Because this is such an absurd line of questioning." And I found myself again falling back to like, let me argue with him and teach him. And, thankfully it didn't devolve from there. But I remember, thinking in that moment, like my brain just kind of became trained of like, I need to teach people, I need to teach people, I need to teach people, because 9 times out of 10 people really did come around. I will say, like, the anger and unfairness of that moment didn't really hit me for a long time, because I realized that I really did miss out on a big part of my childhood, because I'd been forced to be like representative of an entire group of people, which is ridiculous to put on the shoulders of anybody, let alone a child or a teenager. But I think what really kept me going was seeing the difference that attitude and perspective made just in the people around me. And that's sort of how I ended up down the path of organizing. It was around that time that I was invited to an interfaith day of service, ironically at Emory University. That is my Emory connection. The Candler School of Theology there hosts what's called the Youth Theological Initiative, where they bring kids who are interested in seminary to come for 3 weeks and kind of get an idea of what that program could look like. And one of the days of that 3 weeks is an interfaith day of service, where they ask like local kids, frankly, of different faiths to come and volunteer. And I was looking around this warehouse. It was for Books for Africa, and it was like this warehouse, and you're all a bunch of teenagers, like, what are we doing here? But it was so cool because we were all so different. You had Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Jews, Baha'is, like you name it. And we were all in this warehouse to do one thing together, which was sort books. We knew that there was a lot we had in common, but we also knew there was a lot that was different about each of us. And we learned to not only live together within those differences, but also be productive with them. And that was an eye-opening, like, light bulb aha moment for me of the power of being able to organize people about a shared thing that we can all agree on. And and so that's sort of where I found my time, is doing sort of, I joined the what's called Islamic Speakers Bureau, which, I think there's a lot of benefit to interfaith work, although now I do caution people to not allow interfaith work to become faith washing about injustice. But it was a really, really important step on a path of organizing. And it was through them that I learned about places like the Center for Civil and Human Rights in downtown Atlanta, learned about all of the great civic innovation work happening in and around Georgia. In 2015, myself and 4 other people essentially restarted the CARE Georgia chapter. So that's how I have come to learn and meet the lovely CARE Oklahoma team. And this was also at the height of Trump's presidency. And when he started talking about the Muslim ban, our office, they made me communications director at 22, and I had no business being a comms director, but we all had to learn very, very quickly how to handle the moment that we were in. And it culminated, I remember, in 2016 with the Muslim ban, where, again, so many people from so many different backgrounds descended on Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. We had members of Congress come down. We were translating for people who were stranded. We were, it was truly a moment of sincere commitment to a good cause. And as you all know, multiple iterations of the Muslim ban were overturned. That work culminated actually in both 2019 and 2020 with the passage of the No Ban Act, which would curtail the power of any president from doing that in the future. And that was through coordination of a broad set of organizations, including Polygon and CARE and Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and so many others. But again, it's you had these huge problems, but it always came down to a bunch of people coming together and working together because they agreed it needed to be fixed and that what was happening was wrong. So in 2017, I got accepted to grad school, and that's when I went to Georgetown. And the reason I did is because up until that point, I had tangentially gotten involved in some campaigns. I did some, door knocking and phone banking, but, oh, I think this turned off. Yep, it's off. I don't know why it died, but can you all hear me? Okay. So throughout those years that I've been organizing, both on an interfaith level and a civic engagement level, I'd also gotten a chance to see what campaigns were like. Michelle Nunn and Jason Carter had run for office in 2014, and they came to my college. So you asked, how do you get youth involved? They literally physically came to campus and said, hey, 90% of campaigns is grunt work, and we need you to help. And that's what it was. You knocked doors, you made phone calls. It was tedious, but it was worth it. And every door I knocked, I remember thinking, we can literally change the state, knocking it a door at a time. But I also watched as we had various laws be passed to prevent people from voting, right? Whether it's voter ID laws, which you can definitely check people's identity without needing their ID cards if they forget them. They would change precinct locations. They would change, how you can submit your ballot. It was just so terrible. And anecdotally, I knew this was bad. And the reason I share this is because that is why I ended up going to Georgetown specifically, is I wanted to be able to talk to those individuals who didn't believe me and say, I can show you quantitatively, anecdotally, in every method that will make sense to you that this is a problem. And it was great. I mean, I learned a ton. I was able to kind of also see how DC worked. So we talked about learning the rules earlier. Learning the rules is so eye-opening because once you learn the rules, you know how to intelligently break them when needed, but also how to work within them to change what is happening around you. I was hired by Deloitte. I worked for the government for a while as a consultant, which meant that I could pick and choose my clients, which was really beneficial, especially during a Trump presidency. But again, same thing. The president is technically the CEO of 17 million workers. People forget that. We don't remember that when you are voting for a president, you're not just voting for that president. You're voting for somebody to hire or fire 17 million people. And this was at a time when Trump had literally fired entire floors of departments, especially within Health and Human Services, within any organization that provided refugee support, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, gutted. And that experience kind of like reminded me that so much of government can be kind of mundane, like people in their offices on their keyboards, like, but what they're doing has impact on literally millions of people. The report that we talk about coming out of Gaza, for example, somebody had to sit down at a computer and write that. There were meetings that happened, and like, just because these people are in suits and making decisions does not change the fact there's a real world impact on our streets all the time. And then COVID hit. My husband and I decided at the time that we would move back to Georgia because it didn't make sense for us to stay in an apartment. My family, both of our families are in Georgia, and that's why we moved back. And as they say, no good deed goes unpunished. So as a result of that, all that organizing and where we decided to live, the next year they redrew the maps, and a bunch of people who knew me found out that I lived in an open seat. And a friend of mine, we talked about building infrastructure earlier. So a friend of mine runs the Georgia Muslim Voter Project, and she said, hey, we're doing a training for candidates, and we want to apply for a grant for it, but we really need more participants. So can you come and give us feedback? You know how this stuff works. It's really, really great, and we could definitely use your help to partner on this. I was like, yeah, of course, and it was a great, like, it was on Zoom. I remember, like, doing laundry while listening in, like, taking notes, and there was a reporter on that call, and she said, hey, like, I'd love to chat with you about why Muslim women should be involved. Why minority women in general? We talked about how, like, women are underrepresented. Why should women do this work? Great conversation. I don't hear from her for 3 months. On December 23rd, 2021, and the reason I remember the date is it was my husband and I's anniversary, my phone started blowing up. And I was like, why? It's literally 2 days before Christmas. Why is anybody doing anything right now? The reporter had released an article, and the first sentence was Ruwa Romman's contemplating a run for office. And then a friend of mine went and looked up my address to see like what district I lived in. It's a new open district where nobody was running. And so a bunch of community members were like, we really want you to run. And I was like, no. And then they like did this basically mini campaign where they would call me every day until I said yes. And so 15 days later, we launched my campaign. And thank you. And I share all of that because I think a lot of times people think like you have to be someone really special or really unique or really whatever the case may be to be able to run for office, be able to make a difference, be able to come into these halls and convince people to do what you need them to do. But the reality of the situation is that like I was a volunteer. I wasn't like an executive director of anything. I wasn't leading an organization. Like the Care Georgia thing, frankly, being a comms director was a fluke. Like none of us should have been in a director position. We were just young and we said yes. And a lot of times that really is what it comes down to, is you saying yes to an opportunity, even if it's one you didn't plan for, especially for like the type A people in the room that have like their 5, 10, 30-year plans. Like throw that out the window. It's never going to happen. It's okay. I get it. Like trust me, but it's just not, it's not going to happen. But, but again, it's like I had that experience of interfaith dialogue. I had this experience of organizing. Now I'm a state representative in a red state where all 3 branches of government are controlled by the same party. And I went into that chamber and I did exactly what I've done before. And I would like go talk to all my colleagues because I knew they all thought of me as this bizarre caricature. And I needed them to understand who I am outside of what they have imagined me to be. And a lot of my colleagues were surprised. But it really did pay off, because as a result of it, as a freshman, I passed a bill out of a Republican-controlled House. It died in the Senate, but the Senate killed even the Speaker's bill. So, like, it's not because I'm a freshman or a Democrat or Palestinian. It's honestly because they just don't know what they're doing. But, and they're a little crazy over there. Y'all, I tried to abolish the Senate this year. I'm not even joking. Like, I went around with my House colleagues. I was like, we don't need a constitutional amendment for this. We can actually just get rid of them. And when I tell you by the end, so it's called Sine Die, like the last day of session. By the end of Sine Die, I think I had like 40 House members say they would co-sponsor a bill like that. But I mean, that's sometimes you see a problem and you'd be surprised how many people will support a solution. So always talk to other people. Unfortunately, I will say this, the past 219 days have really left me feeling like an open wound. As a Palestinian, my role has really burst past the boundaries of my district. I've gone from being responsible for 60,000 constituents to what feels like an entire nation of people, which frankly is not an exaggeration. There are no other Palestinians in the southeast, with the exception of me and Sam Rasool. Out here, I think the closest to y'all is Iman Judah out in Colorado, and Abdel Nasser up in Illinois. There's 4 Palestinian elected legislators in this country. And for a lot of us, for all 4 of us, and I kind of include Rashida, so 5, we've kind of become the go-to place for a lot of Palestinian families trying to get their family out of Gaza or trying to get support in or policy, you name it. And so I realized that literally it's felt like my soul is on fire. Like, the amount of times I wanted to just like scream at people like from the rooftops, I think has been a feeling I'm not very much used to. But I also had to sit with myself and realize that as a state representative, I have a duty here with the platform that I've been given. And so I did what I've always done. I would sit down with reporters and colleagues and stakeholders to explain to them what it means to be Palestinian. And as a state representative, I've been facilitating conversations between Palestinian families and our senators in particular to get them to understand that what they are seeing, what they are being briefed on, is not true. What people don't realize is that, again, our senators, like we heard earlier from Nabila, it's not like they are all ideologues. There are some people who are true believers, right? You can't really argue with that. But some people are just going by what they're told. Some people, especially when it comes to foreign policy, unlike healthcare, a lot of our senators and members of Congress don't have experience with foreign policy, but they have experience with healthcare. So you'll see them take these harder positions on those issues because they know it, they understand it. And so what I did is I thought, okay, how do we break that DC bubble? And so I took these Palestinian families over the course of, I think, like 4 or 5 months, and we'd sit with them and we would bare our wounds to them, begging them to do all they can to stop this genocide. And as dehumanizing as that moment to humanize us was, it actually did something. My 2 Georgia senators led a letter with signatures from 25 other senators calling for a ceasefire. As a result of that letter, we went from only 4 senators even uttering the word ceasefire to 29. And why do I share this? So I share this because I don't think they would have done that had those senators not been speaking to people directly impacted. Had they not had people in the room say, I know you're getting this intelligence briefing, but let me tell you what my family or my grandmother who is stuck in a church in Gaza is seeing with her own eyes. That is really powerful. And you're all here today with that power. Every single one of you in this room has a story that genuinely could change the hearts and minds of people. I know you don't think it, but you'd be surprised each and every single one of us has a unique experience about the world. And so it's not just Gaza, by the way. Like, we have had anti-immigrant bills come through in Georgia. We've had anti-LGBTQ bills come through in Georgia. We've had, they won't even expand Medicaid, right? Why not? Like, it's just healthcare, give it to people. But what has been and continues to be incredibly powerful for me as a sitting state representative is when people come in and they say, let me share my story with you. They don't need to list out facts. They don't need to list out whatever, but that different perspective allows me to think about something that I never would have thought about otherwise. The reality is that no matter how ideologically different, especially some people might be from us, it's incredible that when you give them a perspective and they kind of like tilt their head and go, I didn't think about that. I know a lot of my Republican colleagues, we had one bad bill passed this year on this issue, and it's House Bill 30. It codified the IRA definition, which defined anti-Semitism or conflated anti-Semitism with criticism of the state of Israel. We actually killed that bill last year. It was dead. It was gone. Because I spoke to my Republican colleagues and I told them, like, let's look at this definition. Let's walk through the implications of this bill and what it looks like. And we killed it in the House. We really did. Actually, we changed it, amended it, and it became a lot better and went back to the Senate. And the Senate, of course, ruined it. And when they brought it back to us, it was post-October 7th. And so people felt like they had to vote for it. But less people voted for it post-October 7th than they did before October 7th. We went from nobody, I think, before my term, 12 people voted against it. And this year, 47 people refused to vote for it. So, again, that didn't happen just because of randomness. It happened because people sat with my colleagues and I watched those conversations happen, and they would come talk to me about it. And they would say, I didn't realize there were so many people that cared about this issue. And the beauty of it is it wasn't just Muslims and Arabs coming to the table, by the way. It was all of our coalition coming to the table and saying, this bill is bad and here's the precedent that it's setting and why. There is so much power in working with people who are different than you towards a common goal. Because the reality situation is, as we've heard earlier, it's like we actually don't meet in a room. Like my Republican colleagues and I don't meet in a room to talk to each other. That's not a thing that happens. We do meet in committee rooms that are publicly available that you can watch. But the reality is that when people are primed with stories from their constituents, it does make those conversations easier, which again are publicly available conversations. You can watch a committee hearing. You can watch the floor proceedings. They're not a secret. There's no secret meetings happening. I wish there were, because I think it would probably improve relationships between parties, but there just simply aren't. What does end up happening is that you have people who are exposed to the same kinds of media and the same kinds of communities that are coming together and saying, we should do this thing because it's good. And they're not hearing from other communities that are like, this is terrible. Why are you doing this? And so you're all here today because you deeply care. I know you deeply care. You would not be here if you didn't care. And I hope today that as you share your stories, even as you get nervous, even as your voice shakes, I hope you remember that if in places like Georgia, we can do what we did, because we were where Oklahoma was like 5-10 years ago, but we kept going. Literally, we changed the state a door at a time, and you all can do that too. So. All right, I think we have time for questions. Cool.